So a topic that's come up for 7 Days to Die is jars. A lot of people like the jars. I like the jars. I miss the jars. And that's kind of open conversation up about stuff with the game. There was the town hall that the devs did, taking feedback and expressing an interest in making some changes. But I think some of the conversation has been kind of short as far as either too targeted or in the general direction, but not where it needs to be. And so I wanted to do this video talking about how we can make jars work, how jars can work within the game. I'm not a developer, I'm just a talking head on the internet, and I have some ideas for what we can do. This is going to be a little bit longer of a video because I want to really expand out some ideas that deal with the right now and look at future things that can be done with the game. I'm stealing this background for this video. I hope the devs don't mind, but this is stemming because of a post on Reddit by Joel Hunick, one of the co-founders of 7 Days and one of the developers. And I'll read the comment that he made on Reddit, which is odd to see them make a comment there. I don't follow the Reddit exceptionally closely. I do read articles here and there, or posts in there where people are complaining or making suggestions, those kind of things, because I do think the community is very unique for 7 Days and what they want. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I think that as a whole, when we look at, the discussion about the game, it's more than just an issue with jars. To me, it's a balancing issue on the whole for the game. And this brings up how a lot of the systems need to be reworked or expanded in 7 Days. I think that 7 Days has been stuck in a state of infancy, if you will, for a while, and it's ready to be expanded on. I think that's the next step the game needs to make. So, looking at water is the issue. It's not so much jars. Jars, in my opinion, is not the issue. Water is. Jars do need balancing if they're going to be in there, but water is the issue. And it looks like a lot of the issue with the water system and other aspects of this game is a flow restriction in crafting and survival. What do I mean by that? I mean, crafting is not as expanded as it could be. If you look at a ton of other survival games, even something as simple as Minecraft, the crafting systems have evolved in a long span, whereas a lot of the crafting systems within 7 Days have just not evolved to a pace I think they should. And I know it's difficult. I'm not saying the devs are horrible. I love this game. I've played tons of this game. But the survival becomes too easy at a point. Well, it's almost like a hill, and once you reach the top of that hill, you're done. Everything is easy from that point on. Once you hit that point, you kind of ask yourself, why are you playing? You almost want to start over. And I hate restarting each major update. A lot of people don't like that, but I get why it has to happen. While survival should be easier, while it should become easier, it should not be so easy to survive that it no longer feels like a struggle. There should be points where it is. And yes, player base does want this. Reading through tons of Reddit posts, just going over it, they want more survivability. The community is, whether they know it or not, they're asking for more survivable, traits. They want more crafting. They want more items. And I don't know if it's an issue that it's hard to add those in or what, but it needs to be added in. There's going to be a lot to this. So I'm going to hit some key points here, and then we'll expand on those going further and talking about a few systems that need a rework or need to be expanded on. The game does not have enough consumable items. We have food consumables, but a lot of other items are permanents. There need to be more of those, and I'll get to that. The cooking system needs a rework. I know this isn't water related, but it is kind of, because it should involve more water. I'll have more notes on that at the end. Farming needs to be slightly tweaked and reworked. Farming is one of those things, that is too easy at a point. And I'll read the comment from the dev, and we'll get into other stuff. The boiling of water is too easy. The time is too fast. You're able to churn out water too quickly. Again, that's a system that needs to be slowed down to stem the flow of things going through. And slowing this would prevent, overproduction. And, the simple solution is just, well, players will just add more fires. Yes, but fires add heat, and that creates an element of danger because then, mobs are going to come after you if you keep doing that. So building more fires would be risky, as it is now. Nothing changes there. So let's get on to the comments that Joel Hunick made, or the post that he made on Reddit, which was, why do you like jars? And it was, we took jars out because there was never any survival element to them. You could scoop up some sand, craft 5,000 jars, and never have to struggle with water ever again. There was never a decision to craft this new cool shiny thing or have water to drink. It was easy to have endless water, and it shouldn't have even existed. Nobody spent a nickel on water, etc. If we brought them back, there would have to be some kind of balance, like you can't craft them, dying or falling has a chance to break jars in the inventory, maybe even restrictions on filling them, or murky water can only make distilled water. That isn't super safe to drink. You'd probably have to load the dew collector with water jars too. Is it the realism you liked, or that it was easy? And so I want to kind of pick this apart, because not a lot of people are picking that apart. Not that I'm saying anyway. But we took jars out because there's never any survival element to them. That to me sounds like an issue with the game, where survival systems need to be revamped. So, and I'll touch on how to fix that. You could scoop up some sand, craft 5,000 jars. You know, again, the overproduction, that is something you control with crafting elements. You're controlling your player base's ability to craft things. I'll touch on that. I have solutions for these. There was never a decision to craft this new cool shiny thing or have water to drink, because there never was a new shiny thing to craft for water to drink. We need another item for that, and I'll discuss that as well. Having endless water, that it shouldn't have even existed. Endless water should exist, but how you get it matters, right? Endless murky water isn't a problem. Endless murky water is something that you can pick up all the time. But it's not the safest thing to drink or use, and has its downsides. And nobody ever spent a nickel on water. I'm not sure what that's meant by. I don't understand that one. Maybe I'm missing something, but anyway, if we brought it back, there's some kind of balance. Yes, there should be a balance. I think jars should be craftable. Breakage of jars should be a thing. Yes. And I have some other elements I want to add into that. A lot of systems that were removed do have function, like, you know, the temperature system, that should definitely be added back in, and I'll touch on that. I don't think distilled water is what should be added there. That tells me the devs are looking at a more complex system, but I think they're looking in the wrong direction. So let me get to my notes here. I don't have a script. I really just read off the cuff, so I want to get to a script here, and or not a script, but to my notes here. And so yeah, so now that we've talked about that, we're going to start with the dew collectors. The reason being is the dew collectors are quite a point of contention with the player base. Dew collectors should not cause heat. That makes no sense. But it should be a really slow system to collect water. In the wiki, it states that dew collectors generate heat, and making 10 dew collectors has the potential to draw in a screamer or two after 5 gaming hours. In my experience with 7 dew collectors, I'm getting 2 screamers every 5 in-game hours. Which is quite surprising. That's quite high. I don't think dew collectors should be putting off heat, but I do think that the dew collectors should be a source of murky water, and that it should be slow, and it should, maybe that rate goes up when it's raining. I don't know on the back end of the game if they have control over what rain does to the environment or not, but it is definitely something where the rain should increase the collection, and if it's not raining, collection should be low. This adds survivability elements. This also adds realism in places where it needs to be. Now, as far as purifying water, if you get the mod for it, you get a filter for the dew collectors that purifies your water. I think the filter needs to be a consumable, an item that breaks down over time. I don't know how hard or easy that'd be to work into the dew collectors as is, but it should be a consumable. I would assume, since we can have fuel in items and the fuel depletes, dew collectors should have something like that with the filters. Filters go bad. This adds realism. It gives us another item we can craft that should be a consumable. There's not enough consumables in the game. It's like once you have a water filter, you're done. And that in itself is creating this problem in the game, along with a lot of other items, that once it's made, you're done. That's it. You don't have to worry about anything more. You have to worry about mobs, but, you know, and you can use that to farm mobs to get experience if you have a heat source. People do that now with bases. So maybe making a filter a consumable would be a better way to handle things. The collection rate does need to be slowed. As I was saying before, right now it's 3 jars every 24 hours. That seems high to me. Maybe, you know, if it's raining heavily in a 24-hour cycle in game time, then you get 3 jars of murky water, but it should not be, in clear weather, in my opinion, it shouldn't be 3 jars in clear weather. It should be maybe 1 jar every 24 hours if it's not raining. And again, that's going to add to your experience, because the weather is going to be kind of random, right? So maybe you get a lot of rain, maybe you don't. I think that, you know, jars should be usable in the dew collectors, but only with murky water. And if you're doing that, it's going to create this kind of positive negative pull, right? The positive is you can now put jars of murky water in the dew collectors. The negative is you're not going to be able to collect additional water at that point, because you already have murky water in there. So you're going to limit your ability to collect water at the expense of purifying it. And purification should be exceptionally slow. the rate of purification should probably be 1 jar every 24 hours. This slows down the water collection and purification rate, creating a roadblock that needs to be in place so people aren't over farming water. And I think that's very, very important to do. So between how you would purify water in the dew collectors, because dew collectors are a fairly early item to get, how often you can collect water, this is going to create a stoppage. It's giving people the option to get water. Filters are a little bit harder to get, but if they're craftable with more complex items, be it like cloth or something, and a few, maybe cloth and coal, it makes it harder to get. They should still be expensive within the shop if you're going to buy them, but it does make it something that's harder to get. So I can come up with recipes for items all day, and that'd be a neat thing to have is more recipes, because we do need more crafting recipes. This game lacks a lot of crafting recipes. It's too simple. Let's move on to jars. Jars should be craftable and usable within the dew collect, not craftable in the dew collectors, but usable in the dew collectors. We've already touched on that, but they should be craftable. Jars should also be used to remove water from the dew collectors. So perhaps a system where the dew collectors, you have to put empty jars into them. And then if you want to extract water from the dew collector, you need jars for that, something like that. Because what we need is, if jars are going to be something that are abundant, which they shouldn't be, but let's say they're abundant, we need a way to use them. They need to be consumable in that fashion, not breakable just yet, not with that, but consumable in that fashion. I think that there should be some restrictions on how you craft jars, such as you have to have the crucible. You cannot craft jars until you have the crucible. And then jars can break. There should be multiple places that cause issues with the jars. So let's say you're carrying a stack of 5 or 10 jars full of water, or empty, it doesn't matter. In any form, you're carrying jars. You have tea on you, you have water, you have beer, you have, all of that stuff. And if you're in freezing temps, the jars should burst. There should be a mechanic where the jars break. Maybe it's not like that in depth, like there's not a noise or whatever, but there should be a notification that, you've been in freezing temps for 30 minutes in game, and now your jars are going to burst, maybe an hour, and then those break and they're broken. And if you're in the desert, maybe if you are carrying liquids, there's a mechanic where those liquids evaporate. You just don't have liquids. They become empty jars. In addition, if you're hit by a mob, repeatedly hit, there should be a chance that those jars are going to break, and possibly maybe that broken glass causes bleeding damage. I don't know if that's going to matter, since you can already get bleeding damage, when you get hit. Maybe that's something where you're carrying jars, you have protection from bleeding, but you've been hit by a mob. So now what's going to happen is you're going to get bleeding regardless of that protection. That adds more of a negative aspect in exchange for like a positive. Got to keep that balance. Falling from a height should definitely have an increased risk of breaking jars. So it should be almost 100% chance if you're falling from a height that would break a leg, right? You should break your jars. They should be broken. Whether they're full of something or not, just broken at that point. I think that, if you're driving, the vehicles can hit stuff. Impact should have a chance to break the jars in your inventory, both on the vehicle and on your person. And if the jars do break, maybe when they do, you're given glass. You're given just a single broken glass item. Like, we already have broken glass in there. Not 5, not 10, just 1. And that'll come important later on. I'll explain why I think that's important. Adding on to the part of breakable items in the inventory, I think this is important. Maybe if your character dies, everything in your inventory that's breakable breaks. So if you have jars, those are broken, now replaced with stacks of glass in your inventory. Your weapons break. You need to repair your weapons. Any tools, those are now broken. You need to repair those. Because even if you're playing, where your bag drops or your bag doesn't drop, this would add an element where you get to keep all your items, but they're not broken now. Or you can go get your items, but they're now broken in your inventory. This adds difficulty to going to getting your stuff. Maybe some people choose to leave their stuff behind. Maybe others will choose to pick it up and repair it. I think it adds another layer of survivability to the game. And then, one broken jar should yield 1 broken glass to the player. So if you're carrying a stack of 10 jars, you get a stack of 10 broken glass is what you get. And so I think that's a better element to things. So moving on, POI water. People have complained about how the water works. Now, I'm not sure if they have plans to fix water and stuff, but I have some ideas here for how water should potentially act in the future. Some of this may be difficult to implement, so I understand that, but I'm just going to throw everything out here in the POI water stuff. And this is going to include both just naturally generated structures and bodies of water you find out in the wild, streams, lakes, those kind of things. bodies of water should be able to be depleted, and mainly for POIs, right? So if you have a house with a swimming pool, that water should be depletable. You can do that kind of with the bucket, right? If you use the bucket, you can yank water out and then that block is kind of gone, but it doesn't deplete fast enough, right? And there'll be more about the bucket in a minute. Jars should also deplete the water from those sources. This works to eliminate the infinite water loop in that place, right? Because we all know if you take, some blocks and you make a 4x4 section, small 4x4 section, of blocks, you could fill it with water. You have an infinite source of water at your base. You can just drink that, especially if you have the filter. And again, speaking of filter, just to touch on that, the filter that you can use as a mod should be depletable as well. I don't know why we don't have depletable condition on items. You should be able to craft the filter for your helmet. It should also be something that depletes, because once you have the filter for your helmet, you essentially have infinite water. Granted, you may be away from a body of water, but if I find dirty water, I can start using that. Also from the jars, I can start drinking that, and I don't take any negative from that. So that needs to be balanced in itself. The filter in your mod, the mod filter for your helmet should be a consumable that you have to constantly make. Again, more consumables for this game is a plus. Small ponds and lakes should deplete with use if possible. I'm not sure how that would work, but they should deplete, and then once those are depleted, the swimming pools, the smaller bodies of water, I think that rain in an area should somehow refill those over time, but it should be an exceptionally long time. I'd like to see a point where if you are pulling water out of a lake or a swimming pool, it's just gone. It is now depleted, and you have to wait X amount of time for it to refill. Maybe a refresh on that chunk, even if it's in a base, you could write, have something in code where it's, a week in game goes by, and then voila, that body of water is now half full or completely full, something like that. That should definitely be something that happens. It's making something depletable that is replenishable but is difficult. And I think maybe for the water, a block of water should be equal to maybe 4 or 5 jars of water. So yeah, there's a good source in there, but a lake would have a good source of water. I know there's some larger lakes, so this might be harder for that. I do think that if there's not rain for a while, maybe a mechanic where the bodies of water dry out over time too. This makes bodies of water also more realistic and makes it something of scarcity, right? Like I haven't had rain in a week in game, and that lake is now half full, adding some more realism to things. I can't remember if there's ocean water or not. I think there is at the outer bounds. It's been a while since I've been that far out on a map. I play fairly large maps when I play, so I do like the 8K maps, the big ones. I probably need to look at not doing that because I never get to explore the full map. I just enjoy having a large map. But if there is ocean water, I don't think it should be something you can purify at this point or use. If you drink from it, I think it should cause you damage. It should eventually kill you if you drink too much of the ocean water. Obviously, in real life, you can't go and drink ocean water without dying. I know it's a game, I get that, but I think we should add some kind of realistic elements that add some limiting factor, because obviously, if there's ocean water, we're never going to deplete that as a source. So it shouldn't be something that we can infinitely farm. I think that if there is water in other biomes, it should have negative effects. So for example, if you're, and I'm gonna touch back on jars again because I forgot a point, but if you're, in the wasteland, that water should be contaminated with radiation. You should not be able to drink that without getting radiation damage, stuff like that. Similarly, if you have jarred water on you to kind of add to the previous one, and you're in the wasteland and you're taking radiation damage, I think that water should become irradiated after a time. And I think that would lead to having another item within the game, a craftable item, which would be, or not a craftable, but a findable, which is iodine. I think iodine tabs could be a great way to add to, a recipe to purify irradiated water that you're carrying on you, but I don't think you should be able to collect irradiated water. Or if you do, it gives you massive radiation damage, kind of deterring you from collecting that. So, and we touched on, once you have water purifier, it's an infinite water, trick, and we don't need that anymore. So I think that by having depletable blocks of water, this prevents the infinite water sections you can make. It also makes water more scarce. I think that would be a way to balance that out. Moving on to snow. I think that snow is another point where the devs have missed it. They talk about, you can craft jars infinitely, and then you have infinite source of water. Snow's kind of that way too. Once you have access to snow is so easy to find, at a point, you could just start making the yucca juice smoothies, and then you have an infinite source of drinkable. And so I think that that needs to be reworked. They don't require water, but I think that, you know, they should be tweaked. So snow should be edible. I do think snow should be edible and give you a small amount of hydration, but it should be the same as drinking contaminated water or murky water. That, you know, you would still get a negative from that. Otherwise, you could just like eat the snow indefinitely. But I think snow should be usable in that fashion. Snow doesn't have enough uses right now. I think there should be a melt mechanic on snow. I think that snow would last a long time if you're in the you know, the winter biomes or biome, but if you carry it out of there, you should have a limited amount of time to get it back to your base. That way, if you're playing larger maps, it's not easy to just transport snow infinitely. And if you're playing smaller maps, you know, it gives you a chance to lose that if you don't make it back quickly. Maybe you get sidetracked, whatever. Maybe it should be 30 in-game minutes. Maybe it should be an hour in-game. I don't know, but there should be a melt mechanic for carrying snow. A degradation timer essentially is what it be, like some of the food has. But that way, it's incentive to try to get it back as soon as possible. Yeah, you can farm a ton of snow, but it should be something that you know, takes time to use. And I can't remember right now off the top of my head, I can't remember if the yucca juice smoothie requires a jar or not, but I think it should if it doesn't. So you're forced to use a jar again. That way you can't just use snow infinitely. You add some complexity to that recipe, and then that way, you know, you got snow, great. Now you need to hurry up and make these smoothies, but you don't have enough jars. So all that snow you farmed is going to be useless because it's now melted and you didn't have anything in it. So that snow is useless. You're wet. You know, you're not, I know that mechanic's gone, but if it were back, you'd be wet because the snow would have melted. I think the mechanic of being wet, cold, hot, all those should be brought back into the game. I think with this system that I'm talking about, reworking all of this, it could be better. And it could add some complexity to the game. Crafting recipes. Let's talk about not complex, but adding some crafting recipes, adding 2. So the goal of these recipes should be to fix the infinite water farming issue and slow down that rate of farming water while still allowing players to survive, right? So early on, it's pretty easy to get murky water and you drink it to survive. It has its downsides. And then I think too quickly, you're able to get the cooking pot and make just, you know, boiled water, and then you have infinite water, right? It is slowed compared to what it used to be, but you still end up with water too easy. So I think that, one, boiling water should take longer. I think it should take a minute in game to a minute and a half is what it should be, because it's too fast at this point. And I know some people are going to be like, that sucks, but we need to slow the survival down and make sure that we're using water in more complex recipes more, not efficiently, but in a way that makes it harder to survive so easily, because the game is fairly easy to survive, again, once you can get the yucca juice smoothies. So if you make water harder to purify, and if you make recipes longer to make, it's going to slow down the rate people can make things. And finding that balance is going to be important. But let's get on to the glass jars recipe. So I think that broken glass should be a craftable element from crushed sand, not sand blocks, but from crushed sand. I think that, you know, to make one broken glass, you should be required to use 5 or 10 crushed sand to do that. If you wanted to add in, if the devs are looking at and they want to add in sand as a item in a recipe, I think it should take far more raw sand to make the jars just to balance out. So let's say it's 10 crushed sand to make one broken glass. It should take 20 sand to make one broken glass, and it should be broken glass. And then I think from there, you know, it should be 5 or 10 broken glass and 1 iron to make 1 jar, and the production should be slow, maybe 5, 10, or 15 minutes, and you'd have to have the crucible in the forge to be able to make a jar. This would greatly slow down the ability to make tons of glass jars. Can you do it? Yes, but you're going to have to be persistent, and it's going to attract mobs, right? Because you're putting off heat using the forge. I think that Molotovs the recipe should be tweaked or modified so that you have to have a glass jar now to make Molotovs. No more just making them without glass jars. You need a glass jar for that. And I think that adding more food recipes, more drink recipes, and requiring a lot of those to use jars should be needed. Right now, I think it's boiled eggs require, you know, a jar of water. That's great, but we need more expanded recipes. I think cooking needs to be expanded. And I think this would add to some of that balance. This is not comprehensive. It's just a lot is what it is. So I want to touch briefly on farming here. So moving on to farming, jars should be needed. Jars of water should be used to water farm plot blocks. This, in my opinion, would balance farming a little bit. Farming is far too easy. I have a base right now where I have like I think it's a 20 by 10 section cut out for just planting crops. There's no need to water them. They just stay watered. I think that there should be a wither mechanic put in that if I don't water my crops, it's going, that they're going to wither. This prevents over farming. Right now, I can get food so easily from crops. It's ridiculous. And that becomes important for getting things like antibiotics as well. I think the mushroom stuff is fine, because you can put mushrooms everywhere. Maybe that needs to be revisited, but I'm not going to touch too much on the mushroom farming at this point. But I do think that there needs to be some added complexity to farming. I like the seed balance to getting seeds, naturally when you harvest crops. I think being able to make seeds from crops is fine. It forces you to have to choose between, I want this or that, but the farming rate needs to be slowed down, and adding a watering mechanic to crops is something that needs to be looked at to slow it down. So again, mainly we're talking about water here. I think this adds to the balancing of water within the game. So closing out, try to make this too long, but closing out here, I think that what ultimately this game needs is it needs more complex recipes for end game. That means things that are harder to make. For me, some of the best crafting elements in a game, like No Man's Sky, for example, is the stasis device. Is very hard to craft, but exceptionally worth it. It just takes a while to get. I do think we need more crafting benches. I think there's too few right now, and it makes the game too easy to survive in. It makes the crafting element of this game too easy. I think the production needs to be slowed in games, and I think that there needs to be more progression before you get more of these benches. I know part of the player base is going to hate this and probably hate me for this, but I think we need a separate reloading bench that can handle repairing firearms and to make ammo. I don't think the general workbench should be doing that anymore. I think that needs to be split off, and I think it should be harder to get that. I think that, maybe crude ammo or base ammo can be made in the workbench in smaller amounts. But if you want to make far more amount of ammo, that needs to be balanced out in a reloading bench. So if you want more of the specialized ammos, that can only be done in the reloading bench. I think that's where that needs to be. Maybe this is a side note. Maybe there should be a failure mechanic added in that if you don't have enough experience, you can craft stuff, but the ammo is either really low quality and causes damage to you, or perhaps, it's not as successful. So maybe once you get like a skill in reloading up, you can start making stacks of X amount, but at the beginning you're making one per, and it wastes a lot of resources. Again, wasting resources in early game is very important because it prevents over farming of materials and over crafting of materials. I think a still should be added to the game. I think that something that needs to be expanded on later on is a still that can produce alcohols, so you're not making beer at the campfire anymore. Additionally, I don't think the campfire should be making complex food recipes. I think a stove, maybe reusing the in-game stove asset. A workable stove could be placeable in a building that is modified to use gas, because fuel at this point really only has use in the vehicles, right? In the generators. I think we need to look at making stoves and ranges that let you make more complex food recipes where that doesn't exist right now, and restrict the amount of food that you can make on the campfire. It should be really basic. Maybe the grilled meat, maybe, boiled egg, stuff like that, basic stuff, but more complex, more nourishing items like the stews and stuff should only be able to made on the stove, and the stove would be more of a mid to end game item, because I think the campfire does far too much. I think that it does way too much. So placeable, more complex cooking stoves. I think I lost it in my notes here, or I didn't add it because I wasn't sure about it, but I'll talk about it here. I think that with the still, using more of the fruits would be beneficial, right? So, if you're going to make maybe ciders, you add ciders in or something, whatever those are, you need to have something else for those. So if you're going to make wines, you need to have more fruits for that. This will give an expansion to the amount of crops available as well. Additionally, I think that, if people want better water purification, there should be machines that do that. Maybe a water purifier that puts off heat and noise. That way, it's really complex to make, would require an engine and a bunch of other stuff. It lets you purify water, but it attracts hordes and it puts off a lot more heat. So yeah, you can purify water faster than the campfire, faster than the dew collectors, but it's going to be dangerous to use because it's going to put off a lot of noise. I think that should be added in. So that's kind of what I've got here and what I'm looking at. I do think there's room to tweak this out, but I think just reworking the water system with these elements, with water as the focus and jars as the focus, expands the game out and adds a lot to the game. I don't know how hard or how easy it's going to be to add this to. I'm pretty sure if a modder got a hold of all this and added these in, this would definitely increase the amount of survivability in the game. Just looking at a lot of the mods that are available, people want to survive longer in this game. They want things to be more complex. I like more crafting recipes. Everything crafting related needs to be added to. I think that should be the focus going forward. I think that'll make getting around in the game a little bit more difficult, because now you have to be mindful of where's water, what can I carry? I can lose items if I'm traveling. Travel becomes more dangerous. Locking the biomes off behind badges, I think, was kind of an idea that was had, but maybe not implemented the best. I'm glad they're getting rid of badges. It's not that I like them. I don't. But I think that instead of adding badges, surviving far out should be harder. Again, if you crash into things and breaking your inventory and breaking items, that you may need, it's going to force you to have to turn back. You're going to have to be a lot more careful. I do think, just side notes, I think degradation needs to be added in other items. Tires should break down on vehicles. That should be a thing. Vehicles should have parts that can break or can break and need to be repaired. More things like that. Items that need repairs, food that degrades unless it's kept in maybe a working fridge, stuff like that. The base game is good, but there's a lot that needs to be added on. So that's all I've got for now. I'm open to comments and questions on this. I'm going to try to get this out to the devs. Hopefully they can look at it, tell me what they think. I know it's a little bit longer of a video, but I really wanted to get this out. I thought about a lot of these items, and sure, I missed stuff. That's a given, but I think I covered a lot here, and I think that there's a lot to be looked at here that could be very useful. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below, and what you think could be improved beyond this. If you think I'm wrong on something, let me know. Again, I'm going to try to get this out to the devs to have them look at. I'll see if I can get a link over to them. I'm not sure how to go about that. I'll figure it out once I get this all done and out. But yeah, that's my thoughts for now. Thanks for watching, guys. And yeah, if you guys got anything to add, again, leave it in the comments.